The Aegean wind howled through the mighty bronze gates of Troy. Once the jewel of the East, where marble towers gleamed like sacred flames in the sun, the city now echoed with screams and was cloaked in smoke. 10 years of war with the Greek coalition had carved deep wounds into Troy's soul, wounds that refused to heal. In the highest palace tower, Prince Hector stood silently on the balcony, looking down at the square, now ravaged and bloodstained. His eyes were weary but resolute. Hector, the brave warrior and protector of Troy, knew he fought not for glory alone, but for the survival of the innocent lives within the city's walls. Beside him, his gentle wife Andromache held their young son Astyanax close. She whispered into the wind, "Live, for me, for our son." Hector gave her a sad smile, as if fate had long ago carved his end into stone. Far below the city walls, in the shadows of the Greek encampment, Odysseus, the most cunning of heroes, was outlining the final plan. After 10 years of fruitless battle, he no longer trusted in swords and spears, but in the power of wit. "We cannot conquer the city by force," he told Agamemnon. "But we can conquer it through their pride." Thus the wooden horse was born, tall, hollow, crafted from the sacred timbers of Mount Ida, its surface carved with symbols of peace and surrender. The Greeks feigned retreat, leaving the horse behind as a supposed offering to the gods. But hidden within it were their finest warriors, Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, ready to unleash darkness upon Troy. When the Trojans discovered the horse, debate broke out among them. Some doubted its purpose, among them Cassandra, the cursed prophetess. "Burn it! Cast it into the sea!" she cried. But no one believed her. Her words fell like dust into the wind. In the end, King Priam, old and weary, commanded the horse to be brought inside the city as a symbol of victory. That night, as Troy celebrated, as wine flowed like rivers and songs filled the air, darkness crept through the open gates. Inside the belly of the horse, Odysseus whispered, "It is time for the moon of Troy to lose its light." The city of Troy stood mighty and gleaming beneath the Anatolian sun, its golden walls reflecting light like a god's crown. Towering over the plains of Ilium, the city had stood unshaken for generations, guarded by the will of the gods and the strength of its people. But peace was only a distant memory now, buried under a decade of war, bloodshed, and despair. 2. For 10 long years, the coalition of Greek states, led by the powerful Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, had laid siege to Troy. All for the love, or perhaps the lust, of a woman, Helen, queen of Sparta, who had abandoned, or been stolen from, her husband Menelaus by Paris, a Trojan prince. What began as a matter of pride had grown into a nightmare of epic scale. 3. Inside the city, life persisted, though tainted by sorrow. The markets were empty of joy, the temples echoing only with desperate prayers. Fields once rich with barley and grapes had long since been reduced to ash and trampled dirt. Yet the walls still held. The gods had not yet turned their faces fully away. 4. In the royal palace, King Priam sat heavy on his marble throne, his once stern face drawn with grief and years. Around him, his counselors spoke in hushed tones of strategy and omens, none daring to offer hope that the war might end. The weight of a nation rested upon his shoulders, and he felt it keenly. 5. But the heart of Troy beat not in its king, but in his son, Hector. The prince was a warrior of unmatched valor, a commander loved by his men and revered by his people. He had turned the tide of countless battles, his spear flashing like lightning, his shield a wall against doom. Yet even Hector had begun to feel the cold breath of fate. 6. That morning, he had walked the length of the battlements, watching the enemy camp beyond the plain. Dozens of fires still burned there, spewing smoke into the sky. The Greeks had not wavered, nor wearied. They were a tide, patient and relentless. What will it take to end this? Hector muttered to himself. 7. Andromache found him in that quiet moment, her presence gentle as ever. She wrapped her arms around him, her eyes searching his face. "You haven't slept," she whispered. He smiled faintly, cupping her cheek. "There is no sleep for a guardian," he said. "Not while wolves prowl outside the gate." 8. She brought their child with her, Astyanax, barely old enough to speak clearly. The boy reached for his father, who knelt to lift him into his arms. "Will you come home tonight?" the boy asked, innocence blooming in every word. Hector could not answer. Instead, he kissed his son's forehead and held him tightly, as if it might protect him from destiny itself. 9. Across the battlefield, within the Greek camp, Odysseus sat bent over a crude map, drawn in the dust with a stick. The cunning king of Ithaca was not as celebrated as Achilles nor as powerful as Agamemnon, but his mind was sharp as any blade. He studied the city's defenses with a scowl. "We've tried force," he said. "Now we must try something else." 10. Beside him, Diomedes and Menelaus listened with curiosity. "You have a plan?" Diomedes asked, ever eager for action. Odysseus nodded slowly. "A plan to end this war, once and for all. Not with swords, but with trickery. We must make the Trojans believe the gods have left us. We must offer them a gift they cannot refuse." 11. Meanwhile, Achilles, the greatest of all Greek warriors, remained absent from the front lines. Angered by Agamemnon's arrogance and his own personal losses, he had withdrawn from battle. Though his name still struck fear into the hearts of Trojans, his tent remained silent, his sword sheathed. A storm waiting to be unleashed. 12. The gods themselves watched from Olympus, divided and uncertain. Athena and Hera burned with fury against Paris, who had scorned them both. Aphrodite, ever protective of him, whispered promises of love and safety. Zeus sat above them all, silent, knowing that destiny once set in motion could not be undone. 13. That night, fires lit the walls of Troy, not from battle, but from vigil. The people prayed to Apollo, to Artemis, to every deity whose favor might bring peace. Priests sacrificed lambs, and children sang ancient hymns. But the stars remained cold and distant. No sign came, no answer. 14. In her chamber, Cassandra wept. The prophetess, daughter of Priam, cursed by Apollo to see the future but never be believed, had seen visions that chilled her soul. Flames consuming the palace. The cries of children in smoke. She ran through the halls screaming, "Beware the gift of wood. The horse is death." But none listened. 15. Paris, ever proud and blind to consequence, laughed at her. "You speak of madness again, sister. This war will end, and Troy will stand forever." His confidence was born not of foresight, but of delusion. Cassandra turned away, her heart breaking anew. 16. The days passed. Greek ships began to retreat, their sails fading into the horizon. Trumpets of departure rang through the plain. All that remained was a massive wooden horse, left as a tribute to Poseidon. The Trojans looked upon it with suspicion and wonder. 17. Some urged caution. Laocoon, a priest of Poseidon, cried out, "Do not trust this gift. Burn it, sink it." But before his words could spread, 2 sea serpents rose from the waters and devoured him and his sons. The people took it as a sign. "The gods accept the offering," they cried. 18. In triumph, the horse was dragged through the gates of Troy. It scraped the stones of the street, towering over the buildings. Children danced around it. Priests blessed it. The city rejoiced, believing the war was over at last. 19. That night, Troy celebrated like never before. Wine flowed in rivers. Music rang from every corner. Soldiers embraced their families. The scent of roasted lamb filled the air. Joy, true, unburdened joy, returned to the city. But it was a joy built on lies. 20. And in the dark, hidden within the belly of the horse, warriors waited. Odysseus clenched his blade. Menelaus steadied his breath. Neoptolemus whispered a prayer to Ares. The moment was near. The fall of Troy had begun. 1. Silence fell upon the city like a shroud after the night's celebration. Fires still smoldered in the streets, remnants of victory feasts and impromptu dances. Wine amphorae lay shattered on stone, and the sounds of revelry had given way to soft snoring and the occasional bark of a street dog. 2. High above the city, the wooden horse loomed unnaturally still, casting a long, foreboding shadow under the dim light of the waning moon. Its carved head stared southward, its wooden eyes lifeless. The Trojans had placed it in the central square beside the temple of Athena, as a sign of their triumph over the Greeks. 3. Inside the massive beast, the chosen Greek warriors remained still as statues. Each man had barely moved for hours, cramped and cloaked in darkness, their swords clutched to their chests. Odysseus, ever the tactician, had prepared them for this. "Breathe quietly," he had said. "Think of nothing but the moment we descend." 4. Epeius, the builder of the horse and the first to enter it, had reinforced its sides with heavy timbers and sealed the exit with a thick latch that could only be opened from within. Sweat trickled down his face as he leaned against the wooden interior, praying the Trojans wouldn't inspect the structure more closely. 5. The air inside the horse was thick with tension and the scent of oil and sweat. The men dared not speak. Odysseus, crouched near the hatch, counted heartbeats and stars, waiting for the signal, the removal of the final watchman, the opening of the city gates, the return of the Greek fleet under the cover of night. 6. Meanwhile, within the royal palace, Queen Hecuba stirred from a restless sleep. A dream had disturbed her, one filled with ash and the cries of children. She rose from her bed and walked silently to the balcony, gazing at the city below. Her heart ached with unease, but she dared not voice her fear aloud. 7. Cassandra, too, wandered the halls, her hair wild and her eyes red from weeping. She murmured to the cold stone walls, begging them to listen. They are inside the horse. They will open the gates. This night will end us. But the walls, like the people of Troy, gave her no answer. 8. Elsewhere, Paris lay with Helen, her head resting on his chest. He traced her skin absent-mindedly, drunk with both wine and pride. See, beloved, the Greeks are gone, we have won, we have survived their wrath. Helen did not reply. Her gaze was distant, and something cold flickered in her heart. 9. She had seen too much over these 10 years, too many deaths, too many mothers mourning sons. Though Paris still believed in the glory of their love, Helen had long since stopped believing in anything but survival. And in the pit of her stomach, she felt dread curling like smoke. 10. On the battlements, the last of the night's guards leaned lazily on their spears. Lulled into complacency by the feast and the apparent end of war, they failed to notice the ships reappearing on the horizon, Greek sails, black against the moonlit sea, drawing ever closer to the shore. 11. From inside the horse, Odysseus heard the tolling of the last temple bell, midnight. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Now." With careful hands, he reached for the latch and began to work it loose. Each click echoed like thunder in the confined space. 12. The hatch creaked open. Cool air rushed in. One by one, the warriors slipped out, blades drawn, eyes hard with resolve. They dropped onto the square's flagstones like shadows, making not a sound. In moments, 24 of the finest Greek fighters stood within the very heart of Troy. 13. To the gates, Odysseus ordered in a low growl. "Kill the watchman. Signal the fleet." Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, led the way. His father's blood boiled in his veins. He moved like a lion unleashed, hungry for glory and vengeance. 14. The guards at the main gates never stood a chance. Surprised in their stupor, they fell beneath Greek blades without raising the alarm. Their bodies were dragged into the shadows as the gates were slowly pulled open, ancient wood groaning under iron chains. 15. Down the beach, from their hidden cove, the Greek ships landed silently. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Ajax, and the long-withdrawn Achilles stepped ashore, leading thousands of men, fresh, armed, and ready. The fire of conquest lit their eyes. 16. The city's defenders, still drunk or asleep, were caught utterly unprepared. The Greeks swarmed through the open gates like a flood. They split into units, setting fire to homes, temples, and granaries as they advanced toward the palace. 17. Screams finally rang out. The illusion of peace shattered in a heartbeat. Mothers clutched children, soldiers scrambled for weapons, priests cried out to the gods. But it was too late. Chaos had taken root. 18. In the palace, Hector's old chamber was empty. The prince who had once been Troy's shield had fallen long ago at Achilles' hand. But now, his young son Astyanax woke to the sounds of terror. Andromache tried to flee with him, but the flames were everywhere. 19. Cassandra stood atop the temple steps, bathed in firelight, her hair blowing in the smoke. "I warned you," she cried into the night. "You doomed yourselves with pride and blindness." A Greek soldier seized her, dragging her down, laughing cruelly as she fought and screamed. 20. And as the temple of Athena crumbled, as the city's walls fell one by one, the great wooden horse still stood in the square, silent, watching, as if mocking the mortals who had welcomed it as a gift. Troy, the once untouchable jewel of the East, burned beneath the gaze of its destroyers. 1. The fires spread swiftly, as if the gods themselves had summoned the wind to feed the destruction. Troy, proud and ancient, now resembled a pyre prepared for a fallen titan. Sparks danced across rooftops, catching thatch and cloth in hungry tongues of flame. 2. Men ran through the streets barefoot and panicked, clutching crude weapons or dragging their children behind them. What had begun as a celebration had turned into a massacre. The Greeks moved with surgical precision, cutting down any who resisted. 3. In the palace, King Priam was roused by the sound of crashing stone and screaming servants. He staggered from his bed, robes trailing behind him, and beheld through his window the full horror: his city was dying. 4. He called for his guards, but few remained. Most had either perished in their sleep or fallen under the blades of the invaders. Even the sacred rooms were not spared. The hearth of Troy had gone cold. 5. Outside, Neoptolemus carved his path through the resistance. With a spear in one hand and a blade in the other, he was a storm made flesh. Rumors claimed that Achilles' spirit fought beside him, as if father and son had merged in vengeance. 6. Priam fled to the altar of Zeus within the palace, a final sanctuary. He clutched the statue's feet, not as a king but as a father, begging the gods for mercy. With him were his daughters, including Polyxena and Cassandra, both weeping. 7. Neoptolemus found them there. His sword gleamed red with blood as he approached. For a brief moment, he hesitated, looking upon the old man, one who had once ruled the mightiest city in the east. 8. You killed my father, he snarled. Now feel the wrath of his bloodline. Before any could stop him, he drove his blade into Priam's chest. The old king slumped over the altar, his blood pooling beneath the feet of the god who did not intervene. 9. Cassandra screamed, lunging toward her father's body. Neoptolemus seized her by the hair and dragged her away. This one lives, he muttered. She is Apollo's prize. Cassandra bit his arm, howling curses, but was bound and thrown with the other captives. 10. Elsewhere, Andromache ran through the side corridors of the palace with her son in her arms. The child clung to her neck, eyes wide with confusion. Hurry, she whispered, as much to herself as to the boy. We must find a way out. 11. She passed bodies, servants, guards, even nobles, scattered like discarded dolls. The marble floors were stained with death. At last, she reached a hidden stairwell, once used by palace workers. But as she opened the door, she came face to face with a Greek. 12. It was Menelaus. He looked surprised to see a woman and child. His eyes softened for a moment. But when another soldier appeared behind him and shouted her name, he narrowed his gaze. Bring her, he ordered. She is Hector's wife. 13. Helen, meanwhile, had left the palace before the flames reached its peak. She had dressed simply and walked alone through the chaos, almost ghost-like. No one touched her. Even the Greeks looked away, uncertain whether to view her as prize or poison. 14. She reached the temple steps where Menelaus waited. He looked at her with fury and longing all tangled in his face. You caused this, he whispered. Do you deny it? Helen met his gaze calmly. Do I have the right to deny anything? She replied. 15. He raised his sword, and then dropped it. His rage melted into something colder, heavier. You will return with me to Sparta, he said. You will stand trial. Helen nodded. Perhaps punishment was a kindness, after all. 16. The dawn was red with smoke and ash. The sun rose over a broken city. Troy had fallen, not to sheer force, but to deception and pride. Its walls still stood, but its soul had been torn out. 17. The Greeks gathered their captives, noblewomen, children, old men, and herded them like livestock toward the ships. The temples had been looted, the gold carried off. Even the sacred images of the gods were desecrated or stolen. 18. Odysseus stood atop the palace ruins, staring out at the destruction. This is what victory looks like, he muttered. But the wind offered no answer, only the stench of smoke and rot. 19. Agamemnon ordered the final fires lit, ensuring no sanctuary remained untouched. The fleet would leave at first light, taking spoils and stories back to Greece. But few suspected the doom that awaited many of them on their return journey. 20. And as Troy burned behind them, the wooden horse remained untouched, its surface blackened by flame, its hollow belly now empty. It stood as a monument to deception and doom, watching silently as the Greeks departed, and history turned its page. 1. Morning came with cruel clarity. Where the spires of Troy once touched the clouds, only smoke remained. The Greeks walked the rubble like wolves among the bones of a great beast. Andromache, Cassandra, Hecuba, and the other women were gathered near the shattered palace gates. 2. They were stripped of titles, of status, and of sanctuary. Their new names would be defined by their captors. For Andromache, widow of Hector, the worst was yet to come. Her child, Astyanax, sat quietly in her lap, unaware of the dark decision being debated by his mother's conquerors. 3. The boy cannot live, said Odysseus, cold and resolute. He is Hector's blood. He will grow, and one day, he will seek vengeance. 4. Even some Greeks recoiled at the suggestion, but Agamemnon agreed. A city burned is not enough. Its heirs must be scattered or silenced. 5. Andromache screamed when they came for her child. Neoptolemus seized Astyanax without expression. The boy cried out, calling for his mother as he was torn from her arms. 6. He was carried to the highest wall still standing. Soldiers watched in solemn silence. Then, without ceremony, the child was thrown. His body broke upon the stones below, a final insult to Hector's memory. 7. Andromache collapsed. Her wails pierced the city like a final war cry. She would be taken to Epirus as a slave, her name remembered only in tragedy. 8. Cassandra, still bloodied and chained, was given to Agamemnon. Her gift of prophecy remained, though none heeded her. She saw his death, her death, and the fall of Mycenae. 9. You take me as a trophy, she said to him, but I carry your doom. 10. Agamemnon laughed. All things die, even kings and cities. 11. Helen was spared harsher punishment. Menelaus reclaimed her as both wife and symbol. The people of Greece would judge her, but for now, she walked free. 12. Hecuba, aged and broken, was taken by Odysseus. Once queen of the East, she now labored on a foreign shore. Her dignity was never returned. 13. The temples were gutted, their gods silent. Athena's image was desecrated, despite her favor in battle. Apollo's priests were slain, only the ashes of divine glory remained. 14. The Greeks divided the spoils. Gold, slaves, weapons, and memory. Each general returned home carrying not just loot, but the weight of prophecy. 15. The fleet departed at dusk. The wind was strong, but the sea was unforgiving. Poseidon, though honored with the horse, had not forgiven all sins. 16. As Troy's coastline vanished behind them, a storm gathered on the horizon. The gods were not finished. 17. The people of Troy, those who remained, were scattered to the winds. Some founded colonies. Others lived in shadows. Troy was no more, but its bloodline endured. 18. The gods watched from Olympus. Some wept. Others turned their faces away. None had clean hands. 19. And in the ruins, among smoldering stone, wildflowers began to grow. Even ruin bears seeds. 20. Thus ended the greatest city of its age. But in ending, it became eternal. The sea, once a bearer of trade and adventure, now bore the burden of stolen souls and God's wrath. As the Greek fleet pushed off from Troy's charred shores, few noticed the uneasy silence of the waves. Agamemnon stood at the prow of his ship, Cassandra beside him, her face pale, her eyes distant. She murmured prophecies to the wind, and the crew, already nervous, whispered that madness had taken her. Odysseus's ship cut through the surf with steady purpose. He alone smiled, as though plotting already his next move. Yet Athena, his once patron, watched in silence. Her temple had not been spared. Menelaus, though reunited with Helen, found no peace. She sat apart from him, eyes on the sea, as if expecting the gods to rise and carry her away. No words passed between them. A storm gathered as the ships reached open water. Thunder cracked, and Poseidon unleashed his fury. Waves towered like giants. Ships splintered. Men drowned, their cries lost in the gale. Ajax the Lesser, who had violated Cassandra in Athena's temple, was struck by lightning and thrown into the sea. His ship capsized, and no one mourned. Agamemnon's ship weathered the storm, but barely. By the time they reached Mycenae, it was Cassandra who guided the helm, her eyes ablaze with vision. Her warnings of doom were ignored. At Mycenae's gates, Clytemnestra waited. She wore no crown, only a cloak of patience and hate. The sacrifice of their daughter Iphigenia had never left her heart. Agamemnon entered his halls with pride and trophies. Cassandra followed, whispering of death in every corridor. The queen greeted her husband with false smiles and veiled daggers. That night, as Agamemnon bathed, Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus struck. Blood filled the palace baths. Cassandra too was slain, her final cry echoing with the truth that had always gone unheard. Word spread. Mycenae had fallen not to war, but to vengeance. The gods took no side. Justice and vengeance blurred into one. Meanwhile, Odysseus wandered. His voyage would last 10 years. Monsters, storms, and sorcery tested him. The gods who once aided him now challenged his cunning. At home, Penelope waited, weaving an unweaving hope. Telemachus grew into manhood, his father a legend who might never return. Helen and Menelaus returned to Sparta. Though they sat on the same throne, a chasm divided them. The people looked at Helen with awe and unease. Was she victim or villain? Neoptolemus ruled in Epirus, a cold and distant king. Andromache bore him children, but her heart remained in Troy. At night, she whispered Hector's name to the stars. The survivors of Troy scattered across the world. Aeneas, carrying his father and household gods, would one day found a city far to the west. In every market and court, bards began to sing of Troy. Of glory, of tragedy, of love and ruin. The songs spread further than any army ever could. The war had ended, but its echo shaped generations. Heroes were immortalized. Villains were debated. The line between the two blurred with every retelling. The Greek ships had left Troy's burning shore behind, but the war's shadow stretched far beyond the ruins. On the open sea, the fleet faced storms that tested their resolve and the gods' favor. Poseidon, wrathful for the desecration of his sacred city, stirred the waters with fierce winds and towering waves. Many vessels were lost, and survivors clung to wreckage, praying for mercy. Meanwhile, Odysseus, the architect of Troy's fall, faced his own trials. His mind was as restless as the sea. Each night, he dreamed of home and Penelope, but the gods were not yet done with him. Athena, protector and guide, whispered warnings that the journey would be long and fraught with peril. Back on land, the scattered survivors of Troy struggled to find refuge. Some fled eastward to unknown lands, carrying stories and sorrow. Others were enslaved, forced into lives of hardship far from the soil of their ancestors. Among them, Andromache toiled in distant courts, her heart forever tethered to her lost city and son. Cassandra, captive yet defiant, endured captivity in Agamemnon's palace. Her visions haunted her captors as much as herself, foretelling doom for those who ignored the past. Yet, her warnings fell on deaf ears, and the cycle of violence continued to turn. The gods, watching from their lofty thrones, quarreled over the fate of men. Some mourned the destruction wrought by mortals' pride and deceit, others reveled in the downfall of a rival power. Yet, none could alter the course of fate, only observe as history unfolded. As seasons passed, tales of Troy's grandeur and downfall spread throughout Greece and beyond. Bards sang of heroes and horrors, of love and loss. The wooden horse became legend, a symbol of cunning and catastrophe. Yet, beneath the stories, the ashes of a once great civilization still smoldered. The survivors carried with them the weight of memory, the ghosts of loved ones, and the hope for renewal. And though Troy was no more, its legacy endured, etched into the hearts of those who remembered, whispered by the winds, and immortalized in the songs of the ages. The years following Troy's fall were a time of wandering and reckoning. The Greek heroes who survived the war returned home, but few found peace. For many, the spoils of victory were tainted by loss and foreboding. Agamemnon returned to Mycenae, but his reign was shadowed by betrayal and death, as Cassandra's prophecies foretold. Odysseus, ever restless, faced trials unlike any in battle. His voyage home became a long odyssey of storms, temptations, and monsters. Each encounter tested his cunning and resolve. The gods, capricious and powerful, intervened in his fate, some aiding, others opposing. In distant lands, the scattered Trojans sought new beginnings. Some founded cities, blending their traditions with new cultures. Others lived as exiles, their identities reshaped by survival. Among them, Aeneas, a noble Trojan warrior, emerged as a leader destined to forge a new path for his people. Back in Greece, Helen's fate remained contested. Though reunited with Menelaus, she lived under suspicion and scorn. Her beauty, once the cause of war, now became a symbol of both desire and doom. Their marriage was uneasy, shadowed by the cost of Troy's destruction. The gods' influence persisted. Athena, still favoring the Greeks, watched Odysseus closely. Apollo mourned his fallen city, but his power could not reverse fate. Hera's jealousy and Zeus's will intertwined, shaping destinies in unpredictable ways. The memory of Troy became legend, but the reality was harsher. Ruins covered with wildflowers belied the scars in hearts and lands. The echoes of war lingered, reminding all that even the greatest cities could fall, and that pride and betrayal could bring ruin. Bards continued to sing of heroes, of Achilles' wrath, Hector's honor, and the cunning of Odysseus. Their stories became the fabric of culture, teaching lessons of valor and folly. Yet beneath the epic, the human cost remained, a tapestry of grief and hope intertwined. Thus, the world moved forward, shaped by the fall of Troy and the lives forever altered by its fiery end. The winds of change swept across the Aegean as new powers rose from the ashes of Troy. The Greek city-states, once united by a common enemy, began to turn inward, their alliances fragile and their ambitions vast. The memory of the war lingered like a shadow, influencing politics and culture alike. In Sparta, Menelaus struggled to restore his kingdom's honor after the devastation his wife's departure had wrought. Helen's presence was a constant reminder of both love lost and war won, a symbol that haunted their court. Their uneasy reconciliation was watched closely by allies and enemies. Meanwhile, in Mycenae, Agamemnon's return marked a brief moment of triumph before betrayal shattered his reign. Cassandra's warnings went unheeded, and the king's life was cut short by those closest to him. His death plunged the kingdom into turmoil, setting the stage for new conflicts. Far to the west, Odysseus continued his arduous journey home. The gods tested him relentlessly, circling sea monsters, seductive sirens, and vengeful deities all sought to thwart his return. Yet his wit and resilience carried him through, each trial deepening his legend. Aeneas, the Trojan prince, led the remnants of his people on a quest for a new homeland. His travels took him across strange seas and foreign lands, forging alliances and battling foes. His mission was not just survival, but the birth of a future civilization, one that would carry Troy's legacy forward. In the courts of Greece, stories of the war grew in grandeur and myth. Heroes were immortalized in song and statue, their deeds magnified by time. Yet, for those who lived through the devastation, the cost was a wound that would never fully heal. The gods, their favor divided, continued to meddle in mortal affairs. Athena's guidance shaped warriors and kings, while Apollo's sorrow lingered over lost Troy. Zeus watched with distant authority, weighing fate and free will in his eternal balance. Amidst the shifting tides of power, the survivors of Troy and Greece alike sought meaning in a world forever changed. Their stories intertwined, a tapestry of sorrow and hope, destruction and rebirth. And so, the echoes of Troy's fall resounded through history, a timeless reminder of the fragility of glory and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The long shadow of the Trojan War stretched over the generations. Though the city was destroyed, its memory lived on in the hearts of those who survived and those who heard their stories. Among them was Aeneas, whose journey was just beginning, a quest that would define the future of the Trojan people and the world. Aeneas carried with him the weight of his people's legacy, a burning desire to honor Troy by founding a new city where his people could thrive. Alongside loyal followers, he braved unfamiliar lands, facing threats both natural and supernatural. The gods tested him relentlessly, but his piety and courage kept him moving forward. As he traveled through strange territories, Aeneas encountered allies and enemies alike. In Carthage, he met Queen Dido, whose passion for him sparked a tragic love. Their bond was deep, but fate's cruel hand demanded sacrifice. Aeneas was bound by destiny to leave, and Dido's heartbreak echoed through the ages. Meanwhile, in Greece, the war's aftermath continued to unfold. The surviving Greek leaders faced their own struggles for power and peace. Menelaus ruled Sparta, though shadows of the past haunted his reign. Odysseus, after years of wandering, finally neared home, but challenges remained before he could reclaim his place. Back in Troy's ruins, the gods debated the fate of mortals. Some grieved the destruction, others reveled in their triumph. Yet none could deny the lasting impact of the war's devastation and the resilience of those who endured. The stories of Troy, its heroes, its heartbreak, and its fall, became legend. They were told and retold, inspiring art, literature, and culture for centuries to come. Yet beneath the grandeur, the human cost remained a poignant reminder of the price of ambition, pride, and war. And so, the saga of Troy lived on, not just as a tale of destruction, but as a testament to endurance, hope, and the unyielding spirit of those who seek to rebuild from the ashes. The journey of Aeneas was marked by trials that tested not only his strength but his heart and resolve. Each step toward his destined homeland was fraught with danger, hostile tribes, treacherous seas, and the ever-watchful eyes of gods both friend and foe. His leadership became the beacon for his scattered people, inspiring hope amid uncertainty. In Carthage, the brief but intense love between Aeneas and Queen Dido cast long shadows. Her passion, genuine and profound, was shattered when fate pulled Aeneas away to fulfill his destiny. Dido's despair led to tragedy, a death that would forever link their stories in sorrow and warning. Meanwhile, Odysseus continued his arduous voyage back to Ithaca. The trials he faced, encounters with the Cyclops, the enchantress Circe, and the Siren's deadly song, were as much a test of will as of survival. Each ordeal shaped his legend and forged his cunning, a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. Back in Greece, the political landscape shifted as power struggles erupted in the wake of the war. Menelaus' reign was challenged, and new leaders vied for dominance. The memories of Troy, once a unifying cause, became a bitter reminder of loss and ambition. The gods, though distant, played their roles in mortal affairs. Athena continued to guide those she favored, while Apollo's mourning for Troy's destruction influenced his actions. Zeus, ever the arbiter, balanced fate and free will, weaving the threads of destiny with impartial hands. The legacy of Troy began to take on new meaning. It was not only a story of war and ruin but also one of survival, transformation, and the birth of new civilizations. Through Aeneas and his descendants, the spirit of Troy would live on, shaping the future in ways both seen and unseen. The epic tale of the fall of Troy and its aftermath resonated through the ages, a narrative of human courage, divine intervention, and the eternal struggle between fate and free will. The winds of destiny carried Aeneas and his people ever westward, toward the lands foretold by the gods. The journey was arduous, marked by tempests and toil, but each hardship brought them closer to their promised future. They landed at last on the shores of Italy, a rugged, ancient land divided among tribes, fierce and proud. There, prophecy began to stir. The gods whispered through dreams and signs. Anchises, Aeneas's father, had died during the journey, but his spirit spoke from the underworld, guiding his son's steps. "You are not merely escaping Troy's fall," he said in a vision, "but building its rebirth." Yet peace would not come easily. The local tribes, wary of newcomers, met the Trojans with suspicion. Among them was Latinus, king of Latium, who saw in Aeneas a figure of destiny. He offered his daughter, Lavinia, in marriage, hoping to unite their peoples. But such unity came at a price. Turnus, a powerful local prince and Lavinia's original suitor, rejected the alliance. His pride and honor demanded vengeance. Thus, a new war ignited, a war not for glory, but for survival and future. The Trojans, weary yet determined, once more took up arms. Aeneas led with the same fire that had once burned in Hector. He was not a conqueror but a founder. Yet battle was unavoidable. The fields of Latium became stained with blood, the cries of war rising anew beneath foreign skies. The gods watched. Venus, Aeneas's divine mother, protected him with fierce devotion. Juno, still seething from the judgment of Paris, opposed him, sending fury to stir Turnus's rage. The ancient rivalries of Olympus once more played out in mortal lives. As the war unfolded, Aeneas sought not only victory but understanding. He walked among his people, stood beside his allies, and carried the burden of Troy not as a ruin but as a seed. His love for Lavinia grew, quiet and steady, unlike the flames of Dido that once consumed him. In the final clash, Aeneas and Turnus met in single combat. Both were fierce, both noble. But destiny sided with the Trojan. As Turnus fell, Aeneas stood victorious, not as a destroyer, but as a builder of legacies. From that blood-soaked field, a new lineage would arise. Rome, the city of Aeneas's descendants, would one day become an empire. And so, from the fall of Troy, a greater future was born. With the death of Turnus, the war in Latium came to an uneasy end. Aeneas stood over his fallen rival not in triumph, but in reflection. He had claimed victory, but the cost weighed heavily upon him. He had not sought conquest, only a place for his people to thrive. Yet war had followed him from the ashes of Troy to the soil of Italy, as though blood were the price of every new beginning. King Latinus welcomed peace, and the Trojans were allowed to settle. Aeneas married Lavinia, joining their houses and fulfilling the prophecy. A new city rose from the land, Lavinum, named for the queen. It became the root of a new people, the Latins, who would carry both Trojan blood and Italian soil in their veins. Years passed. Aeneas ruled wisely and well, but fate, ever relentless, called him on. His death was as mysterious as his journey, some say he vanished in battle and was deified, becoming a god among men. Others say he died quietly, remembered by his people as a king who bore the scars of a lost world. Aeneas's son, Ascanius, also known as Iülus, took up his father's mantle. He founded Alba Longa, a city that would serve as the ancestral seat of what would one day become Rome. Through him, the line of kings was preserved, a lineage that carried the weight of Troy's fall and the promise of a new destiny. In Greece, time dulled the glory of victory. Agamemnon's murder had plunged Mycenae into chaos. His son, Orestes, avenged him, shedding more blood to restore order. The cycle of vengeance spiraled on, and the gods, once so active, began to withdraw their hands from mortal affairs. Odysseus, after years of hardship, finally returned to Ithaca. His homecoming was not joyous but hard-earned. He found his halls overrun with suitors vying for his wife Penelope, who had waited faithfully. In disguise, Odysseus tested her loyalty and, with the help of his son Telemachus, slew the interlopers. Peace was restored, but Odysseus bore the weight of years lost. The songs of bards continued to echo through the halls of kings, but the world was changing. The heroic age faded into legend, and new powers rose. Yet the stories of Troy endured, not just as warnings but as ideals. Of courage, of endurance, of sorrow and rebirth. And far to the west, in lands yet unborn, the heirs of Aeneas carried the torch forward. Rome would rise, mighty and enduring, a beacon of law and civilization. It would carry the flame that Troy had ignited, reshaping the world in its image. Thus, from ruin came resurgence. And though Troy had fallen, its heart beat on, through song, through stone, through the blood of kings and the dreams of empires yet to come. Generations passed, and the fire of Troy, though buried beneath time, continued to burn in the hearts of Aeneas's descendants. From the fertile valleys around Alba Longa, the Latin kings ruled, a dynasty that traced its roots back to Ilium, through Iülus, son of Aeneas. Each king inherited not only the crown, but the silent burden of destiny, a destiny still unfolding. Alba Longa thrived for centuries. Its people grew strong, its culture rich with the mingled blood of Trojans and natives. But peace never lingered long in the mortal world. Ambition, jealousy, and the will of the gods ensured that the legacy of Troy remained marked by struggle. In the time of King Numitor, the lineage faced its greatest trial yet. Numitor's brother, Amulus, driven by lust for power, seized the throne and cast his brother into exile. To secure his usurpation, Amulus feared the line of Aeneas and sought to end it. He forced Numitor's daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity and divine service. But fate cannot be shackled. One night, as legend tells, Mars, the god of war, visited Rhea Silvia and she conceived twin sons, Romulus and Remus. They were born in secret, and their birth marked the turning of a great wheel, long set in motion by the fall of Troy. Amulus, fearing the prophecy of a rightful heir, ordered the infants cast into the Tiber River. But the river, like fate, would not yield to cruelty. The twins were rescued, first by the currents, then by a she-wolf who nursed them in her den. Later, they were raised by a humble shepherd and his wife, growing strong, proud, and bold. In time, Romulus and Remus learned of their royal blood and the injustice done to their family. They rose in rebellion, overthrew Amulus, and restored Numitor to his rightful place. But the fire in their hearts could not be contained to Alba Longa. They dreamed of a city all their own, a city greater than any before it. And so they set out to found it, on the banks of the same river that had spared their lives. But fate, true to its nature, demanded sacrifice. A quarrel broke out between the brothers, over omens, over authority, over vision. And in a moment of fury and sorrow, Romulus slew Remus. Thus, Rome was born, baptized in fratricide, just as Troy had been lost to betrayal. Yet Romulus wept for his brother and honored him in death, naming the new city after himself but building its spirit on shared blood. The city grew swiftly, drawing wanderers and outcasts, shepherds and warriors. Romulus welcomed them all, proclaiming that strength came from unity, not lineage. The Romans would be forged not by purity of birth, but by the fusion of peoples, just as Troy had once been a crossroads of nations. Through its early struggles, Rome clung to its Trojan heritage. It remembered Aeneas, the prince who bore his father on his back and carried a people through fire. His story became myth, then ideology, a foundation for identity and pride. And so, the fall of Troy had given birth not to oblivion, but to a greater purpose. Across the centuries, its spirit passed from Ilium's broken walls to Rome's rising towers. From ashes came empire. From sorrow, glory. Rome, still in its infancy, stood rough and raw upon the hills above the Tiber. But the ambition that stirred in its people, and in the spirit of Romulus, was not that of a mere village. It was the old fire of Troy, now rekindled, burning brighter with every passing season. The young king ruled fiercely, shaping a city from nothing through cunning and steel. Romulus understood that a city could not thrive without people, and so he opened its gates to outcasts, fugitives, and freedmen. Thieves, exiles, and wanderers came, and Rome became a refuge for the unwanted. This mixture, chaotic as it seemed, became Rome's strength. In this crucible of disparate souls, a new people was forged, resilient, adaptable, and fierce. But with men came a lack of women, and Romulus knew the city would wither without families to carry it forward. He devised a bold plan, inviting the neighboring Sabines to a grand festival. As music and feasting filled the air, the Romans seized the Sabine women, forcing them into marriage. It was a brutal act, a dark echo of earlier betrayals, Paris stealing Helen, the Greeks seizing Cassandra. But this time, the women, over time, came to love their new lives. They pleaded for peace when their Sabine fathers and brothers returned in fury. Their intervention ended the bloodshed, and the Sabines joined with the Romans, merging cultures just as Trojans had merged with Latins. Under Romulus's reign, Rome began to rise, not just in size but in spirit. Temples were built, rituals established, laws inscribed. Yet Romulus remained a warrior king, ever restless. He fought against rival tribes, expanded Roman borders, and taught his people that might and order went hand in hand. Then, one day, he vanished. Legends say Romulus was taken up by the gods in a chariot of fire during a thunderstorm, disappearing from the mortal world. Others whispered that the senators murdered him in secret. But the official tale prevailed. Romulus became the god Quirinus, protector of the Roman people. His disappearance marked the end of Rome's founding age and the beginning of its growth. New kings followed, some wise, others cruel, but each contributed to Rome's character. Numa Pompilius brought peace and piety, Tullus Hostilius waged war. Ancus Marcius built bridges and harbors. Slowly, the city began to transform into a civilization. Through all of this, the memory of Troy endured. Romans did not forget Aeneas. His story was taught to children, sculpted into marble, sung by poets. The flame that fled Troy still burned in their temples, in their ambition, in their belief that they were chosen by fate. Rome began to look outward. Its people saw not just a city, but the seeds of an empire. And in their hearts, they believed it was destiny, that the gods had spared Aeneas not to preserve the past, but to shape the future. The line from Troy to Rome was unbroken. In every Roman victory, there echoed the fall of Ilium. In every triumphal arch, one could trace the shadow of the horse that brought down a city. What Troy had lost, Rome vowed to reclaim: order, greatness, and eternal glory. As Rome matured under its line of kings, the Trojan bloodline coursing through its people surged with ambition. The city transformed from a humble settlement on the Palatine Hill to a powerful kingdom with influence stretching beyond the Tiber. But even in peace, Rome was never still. The flame inherited from Aeneas compelled it forward, through conquest, through vision, through destiny. The last of Rome's 7 kings, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, epitomized both the glory and the peril of monarchy. A man of Etruscan descent, Tarquin ruled with ruthless efficiency. He expanded Rome's walls, built great temples, including the magnificent Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline, and brought discipline to the Roman legions. But his ambition, unchecked by law or tradition, turned to tyranny. Tarquin's rule grew cruel. He ignored the Senate, surrounded himself with bodyguards, and ruled by fear. The memory of Troy, once a cautionary tale of arrogance and excess, seemed forgotten under his heavy hand. The line of Aeneas had produced founders, but now threatened to yield a despot. The breaking point came not through battle, but through injustice. Tarquin's son, Sextus, committed an unspeakable act against Lucretia, a noblewoman of unmatched virtue and honor. Her suicide, after revealing the crime, became the spark that ignited revolution. Her kinsman, Lucius Junius Brutus, descended from royal blood yet bound to justice, rose with the people and led an uprising against the monarchy. The Romans cast out Tarquin and abolished kingship. In its place, they founded a republic, a bold experiment in governance where power would be shared, checked, and, in theory, accountable. Brutus and Collatinus were named the first consuls. The old traditions were swept away. The people swore never to suffer another king. But even as the republic emerged, the spirit of Troy lived on. It was not just a memory of lineage, it was a symbol of survival. The Romans believed they were the heirs of a fallen greatness, now charged with building something eternal. Aeneas had borne his father from the flames. Rome now bore the torch of civilization through law, discipline, and order. In the early days of the Republic, the people faced relentless trials. The deposed Tarquin sought allies among neighboring cities. Battles raged at the gates, but the Romans fought with the ferocity of those who had learned from centuries of loss. At the Battle of Lake Regillus, legend said the twin gods Castor and Pollux rode alongside Roman cavalry, ensuring victory and divine favor. The Republic grew stronger. New laws were codified, first the 12 Tables, etched in bronze, granting rights to all free citizens. The Senate became the guardian of tradition, while the assemblies gave voice to the people. It was not a perfect system, but it was resilient, pragmatic, and deeply Roman. Through this evolution, the ideals of Aeneas guided them. Duty to one's people, reverence for the gods, and the pursuit of a destiny greater than any individual. Roman virtues, pietas, gravitas, virtus, were born not only of philosophy, but of myth. The city that rose from ashes would not fall easily. And as Rome's reach extended, its people told and retold the tale of Troy, not as a tale of defeat, but as a beginning. The story of their forefather who braved the wrath of gods and men to secure a future for his people became the moral spine of a nation. In every triumph, every expansion, every challenge met and overcome, there echoed a voice from the past: "This is why we endure." Rome, now firmly rooted in its republican identity, began to look beyond its own borders. The lessons of Troy had been absorbed into its soul, not as mourning, but as motive. The early republic, forged in the fire of revolt, grew hardened by conflict. Every neighboring tribe, the Sabines, Volsci, Equi, Etruscans, tested its will. And each time, Rome fought not only for survival, but for the right to shape its future. The consuls led the armies, and the Senate held the pulse of the city. Yet the tension between the patricians, the aristocratic descendants of Rome's oldest families, and the plebeians, the common people, grew year by year. The plebeians, who made up the backbone of Rome's legions, began to demand a voice equal to their sacrifice. In time, through strikes, negotiations, and civil struggles known as the conflict of the orders, the plebeians won critical rights. Tribunes were established, elected officials who could veto laws and protect the rights of the people. Slowly, Rome's republic evolved. It was never static. It bent, it reformed, it adapted, just as Aeneas had adapted in foreign lands. With domestic order stabilizing, Rome turned its eyes southward. The Greek colonies in Italy, rich, cultured, and independent, posed both opportunity and threat. When war came, it was brutal. The city of Tarentum called for help from Pyrrhus, king of Epirus, a descendant of Achilles himself. He brought elephants and a veteran army across the sea, clashing with Rome in battles remembered for their ferocity. Rome lost and learned. Pyrrhus won, but with such heavy losses that he famously said, "Another such victory and I am undone." Eventually, Rome outlasted him, not with greater brilliance, but with greater endurance. The Romans never claimed to be like Achilles. They were heirs of Aeneas, stubborn, enduring, undefeated in spirit. Victorious in Italy, Rome's ambition widened. Across the sea lay Carthage, a Phoenician power with wealth, fleets, and a growing empire. The First Punic War erupted, a contest for control of Sicily. It was a new kind of war, fought at sea, where Rome was inexperienced. But Rome did what it always did, adapted. They built a navy from scratch, copied captured Carthaginian ships, and invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into infantry fights. After 20 years of grinding conflict, Rome emerged victorious. Sicily became its first province. It was the beginning of empire. And in the heart of every Roman was the belief that the gods, the fates, and the legacy of Troy guided their steps. But Carthage would not forgive. In the Second Punic War, Hannibal, one of the greatest generals in history, crossed the Alps with elephants and fire in his heart. He brought Rome to its knees at Cannae, where tens of thousands of Roman soldiers fell in a single day. But even in defeat, Rome refused to die. They recalled Aeneas, wandering after the destruction of his home, carrying his wounded father and the future of a people. Rome too would carry on. They refused to negotiate, refused to surrender. They bled, they endured. Eventually, Scipio Africanus brought the war back to Carthage and crushed Hannibal at Zama. The gods of war had tested Rome, and Rome had passed. From the fall of Troy, through Alba Longa and the founding of Rome, through kings and republic, through rebellion and war, the fire lit by Aeneas still blazed. Rome was no longer a city, it was a vision, a force of will, a bearer of fate. And now, with the Mediterranean beneath its feet, the Roman Republic stood on the cusp of something even greater, a destiny that would reshape the world. Rome stood triumphant after the Second Punic War. Carthage had been humbled, the Western Mediterranean brought to heel. Yet peace never lingered long in the heart of an empire forged through war. The Republic, vast and wealthy, began to strain under the weight of its own expansion. New provinces meant new resources, but also new enemies, new unrest, and new ambitions. The Roman Senate, once a guardian of tradition and order, now swelled with pride and corruption. Generals returning from foreign campaigns brought not only gold and glory but private armies, loyal to them rather than to the state. The balance of Rome, the delicate machinery of power between Senate, people, and magistrates, began to shift dangerously. Among these rising figures stood men whose names would shape the course of history: Marius, Sulla, Pompey, Crassus. Each chased power, each claimed to defend the Republic while bending its laws to serve personal ambition. Meanwhile, the people, especially the poor and dispossessed, suffered. Farmland was abandoned for slave-run estates. The once proud backbone of the Roman legions, the small landowning citizen, grew scarce. It was in this climate of unrest and uncertainty that one man rose whose name would forever eclipse all others: Gaius Julius Caesar. Brilliant, eloquent, fearless, and descended, by his own family's claim, from Iulus, son of Aeneas, Caesar saw in Rome's chaos a calling. He believed the Republic was crumbling, no longer fit to govern a world so vast. As consul and then governor of Gaul, Caesar waged campaigns of breathtaking speed and cruelty, subduing tribes, crossing rivers and mountains, extending Rome's borders beyond imagination. His commentaries made him a legend in his own lifetime. But with power came danger. The Senate feared him, Pompey opposed him, and so Caesar did the unthinkable: he crossed the Rubicon. By doing so, he defied Rome's sacred laws. It was civil war. Yet Caesar, like Aeneas before him, refused to be stopped by convention. He moved with divine urgency, defeating Pompey, chasing him to Egypt, entangling himself with Cleopatra, and returning to Rome in triumph. He was declared dictator for life. To his supporters, he was the savior of Rome. To his enemies, he was a tyrant no better than Tarquin the Proud. On the Ides of March, in the Senate itself, he was stabbed to death by men who believed they were saving the Republic, among them, his own adopted son, Brutus. But Caesar's death did not restore the Republic. It shattered it. In the chaos that followed, Caesar's true heir emerged: not Brutus, not Cassius, but Gaius Octavius, his great-nephew, adopted in name and blood. Octavian was young, quiet, careful, but possessed the cunning of a serpent and the vision of a god. He outmaneuvered Mark Antony and Cleopatra, defeated them at Actium, and took absolute power. But he did not call himself king. He was princeps, the first citizen. Augustus, the revered one. He cloaked his rule in tradition, while quietly rebuilding Rome into an empire ruled by one man. The Republic was dead, but Rome had been reborn. Under Augustus, peace returned. Roads stretched from Britain to Syria. Laws were codified, temples restored, armies disciplined. The gates of Janus, god of war, were closed. Poets sang of a new golden age, and at their head stood Virgil, whose Aeneid told the story of Aeneas in full, not just as a tale of the past, but as prophecy fulfilled. Aeneas had fled burning Troy. Augustus had built an eternal Rome. And so the circle closed, not in ashes, but in marble. The fire that once consumed Ilium now lit the lamps of empire. The dream of Troy had found its final form, not in a city destroyed, but in a civilization that would endure for 1,000 years. Rome, under Augustus, stood radiant, a colossus of marble where once there was clay. Peace, they said, had been won. The gates of Janus were closed. The empire stretched from the cold shores of Britannia to the golden sands of Egypt. But within the splendor, shadows began to gather. For even as Augustus forged an age of glory, he could not escape the truth all heirs of Troy had faced. No empire, no matter how mighty, is free from fate. The Pax Romana was a delicate veil, and behind it, rivalries brewed. The Senate, once the heart of the Republic, now bowed and whispered. Augustus, reforms had brought stability, yes, but at the cost of freedom. And the people, once fierce defenders of their civic voice, grew complacent beneath the weight of bread and spectacle. Gladiators bled for cheers, actors mimicked gods, and the mob forgot how to rule. Within the imperial household, the strain deepened. Augustus had no sons, only stepsons, grandsons, nephews. He pinned his hopes on the youth Marcellus, but the boy died young. Next came Tiberius, grim and unloved, chosen not for brilliance but for necessity. As Augustus aged, the divine glow around him sharpened. Statues rose, temples were built in his name, and whispers spread. He was not merely a ruler, he was a god among mortals. But the gods of Rome were never gentle. They watched with old eyes, remembering Ilium's fall, the pride of Priam, the wrath of Achilles, the deceit of Odysseus. They remembered that Troy did not burn from weakness, but from the arrogance of believing it could not fall. And now Rome mirrored that pride. The roads were straight, the legions disciplined, the aqueducts flowing. But in its temples, empty rituals echoed. The augurs read omens that none dared interpret truthfully. Old virtues faded, pietas, gravitas, virtus, replaced by ambition, lust, and paranoia. In the provinces, uprisings flared. In Judea, whispers of a new kingdom, one not of this world, troubled Roman governors. In Germania, Varus marched 3 legions into the Teutoburg forest and never returned. The eagles, symbols of Rome's power, were captured, and the empire trembled. Augustus tore his garments and screamed into the void, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." The drama grew inward as well. The succession loomed over Augustus like a sword. His wife, Livia, maneuvered in silence, clearing the path for her son Tiberius. Poison, exile, and intrigue stained the marble halls of the Palatine. One by one, rivals vanished, and Tiberius stood alone, sole heir to a world built not by his hands, but by the dream of a man who once bore his father through fire. When Augustus died, the skies darkened. Rome mourned, or pretended to. His body lay in state, and the people wept as they remembered the peace, the victories, the temples. But beneath the mourning was fear. What now? Would the gods allow a second Augustus? Or had the star of Aeneas begun to dim? Tiberius took the throne, but he was no hero, no founder. He ruled with suspicion, retreating into shadows. Trials, executions, betrayal, these became the rites of empire. The Senate, stripped of its dignity, became a stage for fear. And in the alleys of Rome, poets whispered of Troy again, not as a beginning but as a warning. And yet, the fire still burned. In the far corners of the empire, in the windswept hills and distant deserts, Rome's legions still marched. They built roads, forts, and cities in the name of Aeneas. And in every soldier's heart, there was pride, they were Rome. But there was also a flicker of unease, a sense that something sacred had begun to rot. The curtain had not yet fallen, but the audience had begun to stir. The marble gleamed, but the foundation groaned. The story of Troy, once told with triumph, now returned with a darker voice. And in the heavens, the gods waited, for the moment when myth and history would meet again, and the last act would begin. Rome, the eternal city, stood tall upon her 7 hills, but the fire of her founding had cooled to embers. The dream that Aeneas once bore on his back, the hope kindled by survivors of a fallen Troy, now flickered beneath a gathering storm. The marble facades remained, the legions still marched, and the eagles still flew, but behind it all, a deeper silence fell. The emperors who followed Augustus grew increasingly erratic. Some were cruel, others mad: Caligula, who named his horse a senator; Nero, who fiddled while the city burned. Each ruled like a god, yet died like a mortal. The Senate became a chamber of fear, the people a crowd to be bribed or broken. Rome still called itself Imperium, but its soul had wandered. And yet, not all was lost. Across the empire, in the poorest quarters, whispers took root. Not of Caesar, nor of Jupiter, nor of Mars, but of another son, another exile. A man nailed to a cross in a distant land, said to have risen from the dead. He spoke of love, mercy, and a kingdom not of this world. His followers, once hunted, spread like wind-stirred embers. Rome struck them down, but they returned, quiet, resolute, aflame with something the empire could neither conquer nor understand. In catacombs, they carved symbols of hope. In silence, they defied the mightiest power the world had known. The flame of Troy had taken new shape. As centuries passed, emperors rose and fell. Constantine saw a vision, a cross in the sky, and embraced the faith once persecuted. Temples to Jupiter became churches to Christ. Rome baptized itself, but it could not escape its legacy. The empire split, east and west. The east, Byzantium, would last 1,000 years more. The west decayed from within. And then came the barbarians. They swept down from forests and steppes, Goths, Vandals, Huns, driven by hunger, by fury, by fate. Rome, once the terror of the world, now trembled. In 410, Alaric's men breached the city walls. For the first time in 800 years, the capital of the world fell to foreign hands. The sack was brutal, yet almost reverent. Alaric, like many, believed in Christ. He spared the churches, walked among the ruins, and wept. For he, too, had grown up in the long shadow of Rome. Even her enemies mourned her fall. In 476, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, bearing the name of both founder and first emperor, was deposed. A child, sent into obscurity. No legions rose to defend him. No omens warned of the end. The flame flickered, and was gone. But Troy had taught the world this: endings are not final. The story of Aeneas was not just survival, it was transformation. The Trojan fire had passed through ashes, through marble, through blood and scripture. And now, it lived on not in palaces, but in words. In law, in roads, in thought, in faith, in every nation that drew breath from Roman bones. Aeneas had carried his father from the flames to preserve memory. Rome had carried Troy further than Aeneas could have dreamed. And somewhere, on a quiet hill, where grass grows among broken columns, the wind still whispers. Not of glory, not of conquest, but of the eternal fire that men cannot tame, the fire that begins again. Thus, Troy fell. And thus, Rome. But the story endures. Gentle, attractive, dramatic stories are always waiting for you to come with us with sad stories to accompany you home. Insomnia Historian wishes you always happy.